All right, Jay, why don't you kick us off and we'll dive into the topic. Go ahead, Jay.
Absolutely. Thanks, Maneev. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining. Today's our weekly Twitter space where we talk about different business and tech topics. So today we're talking about discovery trees with Steve Kuo. And so, Steve, if you kind of just want to give a brief introduction about who you are, your experience, kind of how you got to where you are, and what we'll be talking about today.
Yeah, great. Thank you. My name's Steve Kuo. I'm a player coach at Industrial Logic. How I got to where I am is a long and, well, some of it's redacted route to get where I'm at. But basically, I've been doing software development, hands-on keyboard as a developer since about 25 years now. I've been consulting and trying to figure out ways to help developers and teams succeed in a variety of ways since then. Um, and yeah, so that's what I play.
Oh,
And
before you go forward, can you, for
yeah,
those of us who are not familiar with software development and or sports, can you explain what a player coach is?
well, a player coach is someone who not only talks the talk but walks the walk. So I am the type of a player coach. To me, is someone that can help all levels from the organization. In fact, just today I was having some VP and senior manager meetings, and I was working with some developers writing code with developers. So yeah, it's doing all things.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Hmm. So
Sorry,
should I
right.
dive?
So,
No, I was gonna say, yeah, right before I cut you off, you were gonna kind of get into the topic for today.
Yeah, yeah. And so today I'm here to talk about a blog post that I have that's on the Industrial Logic website called Working with Discovery Trees. And really, part of it is that discovery trees are a very visual thing. And so I'm going to be referring to a mural document that is linked within that blog post at different times. But I'll try and describe things. But really, I fall back on the old axiom: a picture is worth 1,000 words. And so to me, discovery trees are easily the best way that I've found to plan and visualize work at the implementation level. When they're done right, they embrace minimalist planning, minimize churn, or misturn churn, and harness discovery of the unknown. Discovery trees excel at radiating information, and to me, it's really the missing link between techniques like value stream mapping and story maps and hands-on keyboard work.
So, Steve, when you mentioned using or implementing discovery trees at the implementation level, why specifically at that level? Like, what makes that like why is that important?
Right. So to me, right now, there are a lot of tools that, and a lot of ways that people visualize and track work. And as a developer who likes to be hands-on keyboard, that any time that I'm spent away from actually writing code is a bit of a distraction to me. So I like to minimize the amount of time I have doing busy work or maintenance work or tracking work. And that's sort of what led us down the route of discovery trees and sort of coming up and working with them.
so for the audience who would like to visualize what Steve is actually talking about, I have just posted a tweet on top of this space. So if you scroll above and look at the top of the space, you should be able to see a tweet that I just posted up there, and it has a link of the blog that Steve is talking about. So while Steve, you're talking, I have certain figures from your blog. I have tweeted them on my profile, and I'll be able to post them on top
Mm-hmm.
based on your request.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. And so to me, to get back to Jay's question, is a lot of times when people are doing agile work or software development using agile methodologies, is there's a lot of emphasis on stories and properly written stories. And are they epics? Are they tasks? Are they bugs? Are they tickets? There are lots of tools that are in place to help facilitate knowledge sharing and tracking and visualization of work, as well as generation of velocity. Those things to me are distractions from what agile means to me when I read the core values of the manifesto and the principle, the guiding principles of it. And some friends and I, uh, Garrick West, Paige Watson, Ron Cortell, were all working together, and we sort of came up with this methodology and we experimented and played with it. And another developer we were working with, Quinn Gill, also was very strongly involved, helped to really mold this into an effective tool that we used and have started to use across many different organizations. If you look at figure 1 in the blog post, it's a simple post-it that talks about a story that is to the API receives a JSON payload. And to us, that is the simple high-level story that the whole discovery tree is around. From there, what we end up doing is just on either a whiteboard or a simple tool like Mural or Miro, simple online whiteboarding tool, you're then able to draw a hierarchy or a tree underneath it with some high level items and then some lower level detail items. But again, a lot of this is about emphasizing the minimal amount of information needed to convey what needs to be done while minimizing the detail within it. Does that make sense, Jai?
Yes, absolutely.
Now, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so one of the questions that came to my mind before we go into the detail is, where does this come in the process? Where is it after story mapping? Is it after your backlog is ready?
Mm-hmm.
And as a developer, you are going to start working on a specific user story. So just to set the context for everybody, where in the process are we talking about utilizing discovery trees?
Yeah. So discovery trees can come into play at any point in time, even if you have an existing process and want to just experiment with it. On a team that I'm just starting with, we had done chartering and some very high level story mapping last week. And we came up with some very high level stories. We came up with a half dozen high level stories that were in our value stream. And then we decided to work on a discovery tree for the first story that made the most sense and started working with it. We started fleshing out that tree on Friday, in that we put up 7 high level branches off of the main story. And we started going down the first branch. We put in probably directly under that about 3 other sub items and just started working from there. That was it.
So this whole thing starts as a single sticky, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Trying to help visualize this for those who happen to be maybe not able to look at the diagrams.
Yep.
So one question I have, when I started using this with a client, they liked the idea of having things not be linear but in a tree.
Mm-hmm.
And they proceeded to say, okay, great, let's flesh out the entire tree.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Question mark?
You know, that is the standard habit that most of us are used to is, okay, we can design the whole tree right now. We can come up and we can put all these things in that is in part sort of big upfront design. What I like to do, and what I encourage people to do when they're trying this, is to do the minimum possible to get started with the very first thing. At the same time, sort of looking forward and saying, okay, we're going to need these high level things up at the top. Maybe these root nodes right under the main branch, main post it. But let's not get too detailed into them. As we go down this first branch, we will discover the work that needs to be done. And we can start fleshing out some other nodes, just the immediate nodes, and make a more educated decision and more informed decision as to what needs to go next after this first branch and evolve that. A lot of this is what I call just in time planning. So trying to minimize the work not done and maximize the amount of accurate information that we're able to put in the board with the knowledge we have discovered.
Yeah, Steve. So one of the questions that rises a lot at these enterprises is, what sort of tool do we need to
Mm.
start using discovery trees?
that is a great question. I was working with a client a couple of years ago and one recently that are both, okay, Steve, we understand you like these discovery trees, but please don't sell us a new tool or something else we have to subscribe to. And nothing can be further from my my mind when I'm doing this is this doesn't require a specific tool. This is a visualization tool. It can be done with Post-its on a whiteboard. And in fact, that's my preferred way to do it is with Post-its on a whiteboard. It can be done using any online visualization tool that your company most likely already has. I'm very familiar with using Mural for it and Miro for it.
Mural and Miro.
Yes. I've also seen it done using, there are a couple other online schematics tools um, for it. But yeah, it doesn't, I don't know anyone that has created a purpose-built tool for this. Really, all you need to be able to do is something to put Post-its on a whiteboard, draw lines to show relationships, and maybe even color code them to show the status or the state of those Post-its.
Hey, and so just a reminder to everyone in the room, if there's anyone that's listening and would like to ask Steve a question directly or has any thoughts to complement what Steve is speaking about, please feel free to raise your hand using the emojis, and myself or one of the other co-hosts will pull you up to the stage to speak or ask your question. Steve, I wanted to ask who all should be a part of that process, right? Like when you're talking about making these decisions, when you're talking about making decisions just in time, and not necessarily having a fully laid out plan from beginning to end, who
Mm-hmm.
ideally should be a part of that process so that it's kind of like easily accepted?
Yeah, that's a great question. Now, most of the times I'm working in an ensemble. And so ideally, we have all the right people in the room to have that discussion and to come up with that. And so in those cases, everyone's there and we have the ability to do that. Now, if you're working in a slightly different environment where you're either a team full of individual contributors or you have pairs that are working together, sometimes the pairs can, if they're in charge of the board and that's the story that they're working on, they can add things to it. If it's individual contributors, there it tends to be a little bit more fuzzy. And there The board is there as an information radiator. And a lot of times, if you're not able to gather people together and have a conversation about things, then you need to add more detail, which then clutters up the board or makes the Post-its really big. I should fall back that normally the Post-its are anywhere from 1 to maybe 10 words on a Post-it. So they're pretty brief, and part of that falls back on the philosophy of Agile and what is a story. And a story is a promise of a conversation. And so when we were developing this and fleshing out this idea, it was more, this is a conversation. You should be able to get the idea of what's being worked on and the status of it just by looking quickly at the board. But if you need more information, you actually have to go talk to people.
So then outside of that, like the number of words on a post-it, how do you know that you're getting too granular with a post?
Right. So I would certainly say if you're using something like given, when, then, or you're trying to write it like you would adding a story into Jira with a lot of acceptance criteria and details, that means you're trying to get a little more too in depth with things. A lot of times it's the hierarchy, and it's what could you fit on a Post-it on a whiteboard in your office with a blunt Sharpie, not a fine tip Sharpie, but if you had a 3x3 Post-it and you had a blunt tipped Sharpie, what could you write on it? Does that make sense, Jay?
Absolutely. Yeah. Go ahead, John.
Oh, I'm just chuckling about blunt Sharpie, instead of the nice fine, like writing it incredibly small, that all you have is this big fat thing. I like that a lot. And I want to share that when I used this with a client, and this particular team had a tendency to get lost in the weeds, in the details. Like they would go down, 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 and sort of lose track of what were they doing in the first place. They loved the discovery tree. It just brought such clarity and focus, because whatever you're working on, you just look at its parent. It's right there. You can't not look at it.
But yeah, and that gets to the extreme visibility of it, right? If you're always looking at this tree that grows up into the main point and your primary focus, like for instance the company that I'm working with right now, the primary focus is a walking skeleton. And there's all sorts of discussion around, well, we need to create this infrastructure as code scripting, and we need to do this, we need to do this. And I ask them, is that needed for our walking skeleton? And they look at our discovery tree and they go, oh no, it's not. And then they create a Post-it underneath it, just as a note to their future selves, this is something we need to do in the future.
So you shove it in the parking lot.
Shove it in the parking lot, just like you do at stand up.
Yeah, I think what's funny about it too is prior to you teaching me discovery trees, Steve, there used to be, like when I used to pair, we used to have a little like to-do list that we would keep track of. And the discovery trees become a more visual to-do list, kind of, where we can be like, oh, instead of having to do, we got to refactor this, we've got to add this parameter, we got to do that. We can instead just throw it on the discovery tree, put a pin in it, come back later. So it really is an evolution of what I think a lot of people were already doing, which was keeping track of a to-do list. But now it's way more visible and it's way more collaborative.
Right.
What would you say to folks who say, well, we already do all this with Jira?
I would say if it isn't broke, don't fix it. However, if you're open to experimenting and trying something new and different, you might try it out and find that it really works. I'll fall back again. I'm falling back with the client that I'm working with right now because it's right up front in my face. In fact, it's only been like the last 2 weeks. Is they have a product manager that is working with the team, and he's been with us for our planning in this this discovery tree we're working on. And he was there when we first started fleshing out the first couple branches of it. And we hadn't done any work yet, but we were fleshing out some of the first couple branches, trying to find out how we were going to start. And the very first branch we started going down, we said, oh, we need to get some permissions for these things. And we need to get a description, and we need to get an architecture, and then we need to submit this ticket. And one person said, oh, hey, I've got the architecture right here. And another person said, I have the description right here. And then we just said, okay, then we just need to submit the ticket. And we created, so we had Post-its for those three things. And we actually marked them as done as we were talking about it. And the product manager asked, it's like, when are we actually going to get in and start doing work? At which point in time, I sort of pointed him to the tree and I said, we're actually doing the work right now. And in fact, as soon as someone said, yep, submitted the ticket, we were able to close that whole branch.
So I've
Oh,
seen
that's
a few
cool.
examples in the visuals that I'm posting on top. The figures from your blog. You also been using some color coding. So I see yellow stickies, I see orange ones, I see blue ones. So how are you using color coding to differentiate?
Right. And so for this, I have to apologize for anyone that's colorblind, because I have not found a good way to do this without color coding, at least in the virtual boards. In person, there are some ways that we used to denote cards outside of that were outside of colors, but the virtual boards tends to be color coded. So that's one complication with it. But the reason why we color code things is for easy view. And basically what you can do is you can put one color is a to do, one color is in progress, and one color is done. And the colors that I picked are just completely arbitrary. Now, frequently, the next color post-it that goes up there is something that's blocked. And that could be whatever color you want as well, too. And then generally, most teams come up with a parking lot color of some sort, or a parking lot area where they can put ideas and post-its that they want to keep track of, but don't necessarily apply to the work that's being done.
Since you described to do and doing and done, how would you contrast discovery trees with Kanban?
So one of the things about discovery trees is you're really trying to limit work in progress, which Kanban, if it's done right, you are limiting work in progress. So I would say that discovery trees actually helps to start lending itself, or start you working down a Kanban-like flow, but it's not called out. And I fall back on how I learned Kanban, which was more of a manufacturing mindset, where you've got work in progress, you've got your backlog, you've got work in progress, and then you have gates along the way. And you can tell where there are blockages or there are delays in place by the backlog items growing at these gates. It doesn't have anything like that, but it does allow you to really focus on and say, if as a team we agree we are going to have one in progress tree at a time, then you can very easily see on your discovery tree which branch is being worked on and where the work is being done.
Because you just follow that color down
Yep.
as it snakes down into the details.
Yep, exactly. Thank you.
Awesome. I wanted to take a quick second to just reset the room. So we have some new listeners in here in the space. If anyone wanted to ask a question or add some thoughts to the conversation, just feel free to use that emoji symbol on the bottom right hand of your screen and raise your hand, and either I or one of the other co-hosts will bring you up as a speaker. So yeah, just let us know. This is an open conversation. We're talking about working with discovery trees, and it's being led by Steve Kuo.
Steve, just piggybacking on what John, the question John had asked, can you contrast discovery trees and story maps? Because I imagine some of our listeners have some experience with story mapping, and I think on the surface there's similarities, but I think as you dig into them, I think it would be interesting for you to contrast the two techniques.
Yeah. Well, I'll be very upfront. I'm not incredibly familiar with story maps. I've done them a couple times, and I'm not 100% sure I did them correctly. However, what I see is with story maps, there tends to be a little bit of a drop off when you start getting down to not the high level stories, but the details under the stories and how things are being worked on, and the details that emerge and discoveries, the unknown unknowns that come up as stories get worked on and stories evolve. What I see is I don't see story maps and discovery trees as one or the other. I actually see them very, very complementary to each other, and story maps being fantastic for coming up with those high level stories and how to prioritize those stories. Discovery trees are when you want to take that story that the team's going to be working on and start working on it. Did that make sense, Anthony?
Yes, thank you.
To confirm that too, the current project that I've been working on, that is exactly what we're doing. We are using discovery trees, and we've been story mapping with a lot more people outside of the team scope to kind of understand what's going on. We get those high level stories, and then when we go to work on a story, we pull it down and start making a discovery tree. So yeah, that's exactly how we've been doing it. It's been great.
Awesome. It looks like we have some thoughts from Joanna and then Dustinson.
Hi. First, just thank you. I really like kind of the spatial representation that this provides to see how things sort of like to enable you to write things down and then see how they did, kind of roll back up. One of the questions that I had, and apologies if this was covered while I was transitioning from web to mobile, but have you ever gotten yourself, because I know we have, where we'll, create like a sticky or a note about, something that we want to do. And then because we're trying to keep it concise, maybe not remember the detail of what that sticky meant when we look at it again. And so we sort of default to, it's like, well, if we can't remember what it's for, maybe it's not that important. And if it's important, it'll come back to us. But I was wondering what your experience around that might have been.
That is something that happens. It happens on the board that I'm on that is 2 weeks old right now that I'm looking at. And yes, we fall back on exactly what you said, is that it was important to us then, and we must have resolved it because when we're reading it now, it doesn't make any sense to us. So
okay, yeah, I was just thinking. Yeah, I was just thinking if there was any other, if there was any other, process or thoughts or, sort of like desire to capture those details somewhere else while we have kind of this, stub here of something that we want to remember. But yeah, I guess it does boil down to if it's not important to remember, maybe it's not important to do.
Well, and so I'm looking at the board that I've been working with on the team that I'm on right now, and we actually have one posted on there right now that is our work in progress, and it's pretty big. It's got a whole bunch of detail in it, but it's information on how to script out creation of TLS certificates. And it's all the command line things that we're going through and we're trying to remember as we go through it. And it gets pretty detailed and it's pretty small. However, that is just a notepad that is associated with the tree. It's actually not part of the work that's being done. So what I would say is you can use, because the team has this mural board that is a shared whiteboard space, we can use it to keep notes and keep track of things, but also go back and tidy it up. It's something that I should note is that teams should go back and should be looking at this mural board multiple times a day, certainly at the morning when things are kicking off, and then in the evening when things are wrapping up, just to tidy it up and to make sure everything's on track and color coded or marked correctly, and then call it good. Did that help, Joanna?
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, it sort of reinforces that this is meant to be a living document, and so you revisit and re-update and readjust for new information and what you've done.
Yeah, and that is absolutely true. This is a living, breathing document that should be used and looked at by everyone that's working on it.
All right. Yes, Dustinson, you're next. Go ahead.
Thank you. Great job so far. I'm gonna tell a short little story and see if I can disguise it as a question, but I'm hoping that you can kind of pick up with what I'm putting down and carry it forward. One thing I've noticed is in large meetings, there's a lot of smart people with a lot of really good ideas. And oftentimes I've seen these meetings go off for very long periods where everybody wants to give their contributions. And oftentimes there are other people in the meeting, or it could be the same people, that don't have the same type of attention. They might not recognize where a conversation is going when people start getting deep into it. Working from home, there's plenty of other distractions. Maybe they kind of zone out and go into Twitter. I find that keeping everybody focused is very, very difficult. And one of the things that I liked about using these types of visual tools is as people would kind of zone in and zone out of conversations or bring up different aspects, you could have a natural visual grouping of ideas. So when people would be arguing about different topics or going off on scaling issues or testing issues or functionality, non-functional, whatever it would be, you could move around and say, okay, we're actually talking about that over here now, or your question actually goes back over there. So to wrap up that statement in the form of a question, what are some of the other things that you've seen that help keep a team focused and on the same page where people don't just zone out and drop out?
Right. That is a great question. Thank you, Dustin. So because you're working in the tree, and I'll fall back on working this as an ensemble, is we've got 6 people in our ensemble. One person is driving, one person is generally navigating. There can be some discussion that happens. There's some people and the skill sets spread across. We've got people that are DevOps, we've got developers, we've got QA, we've got managers, and they're all contributing at different levels. And so absolutely some people zone out and some people, float back in and out. And where it helps to keep focus is, number one, we're all focused on that one branch that we're working on. And what you can do is you can encourage people that aren't in the traditional driver or navigator to be in there taking notes or adding some comments. So certainly with us, since we're doing some more infrastructure as code around certificate generation, we have 3 other people in the ensemble that are there taking notes and keeping track of everything that's going on, while 2 or 3 people churn on how to get the infrastructure as code for cert generation done correctly.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question.
And then I saw we had a couple of people move to the stage. Do any of one of the new speakers have a question that they wanted to ask or a thought that they wanted to share?
Hi, I was just going to say this is more about Joanna's comment that, yeah, my dad used to always say the same kind of thing about, well, if it was important, you'll remember it again.
Yep.
And for me, I think another
John, you're
important. Am I breaking up? Can you hear me?
No, John, you're fine. We
Okay.
cannot hear you.
Okay.
Did you have a question, John?
No, I was just going to say it does look a lot like a story map in terms of being able to articulate the kinds of things that you want to build and even stagger them and whatnot. But it looks like the other thing I was going to say was regarding you don't have to do it all. You can, as the way that I look at it, as you learn elements as you're developing it, you go into detail only as you need it. So I kind of like how it looks from a perspective of, we just worry about the things we're tackling right now. So it looks like
Yep.
a kind of a cool thing.
Right. And to me, that helps minimize, the art of work not done, because it's easy for my programmer brain to kick in and say, oh, I'm going to need this, I'm going to need this. And pretty soon I've got the kitchen sink, I've got the bathroom, I've got a shower, all this other stuff in there that doesn't really need to be, especially for a walking skeleton. And the emphasis when the discovery tree is going on, you can ask yourself, and people can ask that are in the group saying, do we really need this to get this story done? And then as you bring up the unknowns that come up, because we never know everything that needs to be done there, we are always discovering unknowns one way, shape, or form, and accounting for that and adding that in, and maybe that kicks something else out too. So the discovery trees, to go back to Joanna, is the living and breathing document.
Steve, are there types of work or types of organizational structures where this just doesn't work?
So it works best that I've seen with highly collaborative environments. And I sort of said that if you've got a group of individual contributors that are all working solo, maybe working across all sorts of different time zones, it's going to be a little bit more complicated because you have less collaboration happening. And really, for the discovery tree to work its best, you really want to have single flow and high collaborative work.
So are there ways for, I guess, say there is an environment where you have a lot of single contributors, or individual contributors, is there a way for an individual to utilize this process just to help organize the way in which they're working?
Oh yes, I could see if I were an individual contributor on a team and I was given, or I took a story that was all going to be mine, I would just work at it I would work on it and map it out as a discovery tree, and it would just be smaller chunks. Now it's interesting. I am going to pull my real life into this for a second. Is I'm currently working on a major remodel of our living, dining, and kitchen space, and I've got my own little discovery tree in place for actually helping me map that out and work with things. So I'm using it with the general contractor and the designer that I have in play, and they're loving it.
this is funny because I actually have the same thing. Like I have a Miro board that has a mind map on it, and then like each node of the mind map like links to a Pinterest board. So I have all my, my looks, my
Mm-hmm.
whatever, my ideas for that like particular area of the house. So
Yeah.
like using it too to link off to other things for more detail as well.
Okay, so let's say you're working with a team and you're hearing about discovery trees today. You go do some research, you think about some ways that you and your team could possibly use it and implement it into your workflow. What are some good ways of introducing it as a method and encouraging people to kind of get into an experimental mode to try it?
I would say the best way for me is, assuming that you've learned about it, you sort of want to play with the idea, you can always ping me. I believe there are email links in the blog post to reach out to me as well. I'm certainly happy to help and clarify ideas or thoughts around it. But let's just say you're at the stage where you've got the information, you have a good idea how to run discovery trees, you've got a good idea of what to apply it to. Now you want to roll it out to the team. The best thing that I've ever done is say, hey, I'd like to run an experiment. And I want to, would you, the team, or the group, or whoever you need to get permission to do this or to get on board with it, say, I'd like to run this experiment for, if you're in iterations, for an iteration, for a month, for 3 months, and see how it goes. So yeah, to me, it's proposing it as an experiment, and asking all the people that would be involved is like, hey, you want to try this out? It seems to be good. It might not be, but let's figure it out together.
Is that oh, go ahead, Joe. I see Joe has a question.
Hey, Steve, this is Joe Tristano. How are you?
Hey, doing well. How about you, Joe?
Good, good. Hey, how tightly coupled, like, there's integrations for all these tools into Miro and into these other boards, and you can create the work items on the fly. Do you have experience with doing those things in conjunction rather than saying taking that snapshot in time and then exporting and then having to keep everything in sync, between the living document and where the beans are counted?
Right. And so for that, what I've traditionally done when it needs to integrate with something like Jira, when there needs to be some sort of tracking involved, is a lot of times that high level story that the discovery tree is on will get a Jira ticket number assigned to it. And then again, this all depends how big the board is, and I try and keep my board smaller. Sometimes specific items on the board will get a separate ticket number, Jira ticket number as well, too. But a lot of times it's just one Jira ticket for the whole board. There are
Gotcha. Okay.
certain times when things come in. If this is new feature development, sometimes defects will be found, or if it's a legacy product and a defect comes in that has a ticket number assigned to it, you can create a discovery tree for that specifically, or you can just have it as a sub branch on an existing discovery tree.
And then it's up to you wherever you put your work items. It doesn't have to be in the leaf nodes. It could be anywhere in the tree.
Correct.
Okay.
And I've seen it, and I was looking back at some of the old boards that I'd done that were on whiteboards, and there were some that had the whole whiteboard itself was a discovery tree that had one ticket number noted in blue tape up at the top. And then there were a couple Post-its on the board that had their own specific Jira ticket numbers associated with that branch for some reason or another.
Thanks, Steve.
Yeah. And to me, it's however the reporting out needs to happen to do it that way. And I know, Joe, you like to provide metrics on how work is getting done and flowing through the system. this, you and I can have a discussion about this later on how to adapt that as well too, because this isn't that granular for a discovery tree. Tracking work items closed on post-its doesn't necessarily map the same way, but
Right.
yeah.
Well, thank you, Steve. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
So, Steve, a minute ago you mentioned, and I just want to, this is several reminder to everyone in the room that if you would like to ask a question or contribute a thought, feel free to raise your hand, and either myself or one of the co-hosts will bring you up to the stage as a speaker. Fazara, it looks like you have a question or a thought to share.
Yeah, I have what might be a stupid question, but I noticed there's a name collision on the word branch with discovery trees and source control is what I'm thinking of. And I wanted to know if there's ever any coincidence of using a source control branch when you're on the branch of a discovery tree, anything like that.
So I tend to prefer trunk-based development, and really don't like branches. And if I do use a branch, it's generally short-lived, like counted in hours rather than days. There's trying to get around name confusion is tough because I can't even, if I go down to leaves and leaf nodes, there's confusion around that as well too. So I like to do this as trunk-based development is my preferred way of writing software. And so I do not feel that a branch in the discovery tree corresponds to a branch in Git or my source code repository.
Cool. So branches on the board, not in the code.
Exactly. Yep.
Awesome. A couple minutes ago, Steve, when you were responding to my question about how to encourage a team to use this method as far as an experiment, you mentioned encouraging them to try it for 1 to 2 months. Is that the typical amount of time that you think it would take for a team to recognize the benefit of it? Or is that just like an arbitrary window?
In part, that was an arbitrary window that I just said. I like to say my preferred duration is 3 iterations on something where you're getting feedback on it. And by iterations, I mean a significant amount of time where you give it a good shot and you're able to work with it in a very good way, in a solid way. When I was doing fast Agile, we were doing 2-day iterations. So would I feel working on a discovery tree for 6 days would be enough? That doesn't feel like it. It feels like it needs to be a longer amount of time. But if you're doing 2-week sprints in a traditional Scrum organization, 6 weeks, that feels like a good enough time. It sort of depends how big the story is and how you get to see the tree, the branches evolve and grow. So I don't have a good firm idea, but it feels like to me about 6 weeks, 2 months is about a good time.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, John.
So one question I have is, when is it too small to put something on the board? Or is it? Where do you draw the line between I'm going to make a thing
Right.
versus I'm just going to do the thing?
Right. So, that's a good question. And I get that question a lot when we're talking about discovery trees and I'm introducing it to teams. And a lot of times, what I'll do is I'll avoid that question with the team I'm working on and say, let's just dive down and create a branch, and we'll sort of know when it feels like it's too small and we're just doing a whole bunch of bookkeeping. A lot of times those tasks, I've seen tasks put up or post-its put up that took 5 minutes to do, but they were important enough that they needed to be noted that we did it. I've seen tasks that took, or post-its that took like 6 hours to do, also is just one post-it on the board as well, but it was detailed enough that, yeah, that was exactly what it was. It just took that long to do it. So I would say you sort of kind of have to play with it to get a feel for it, but noting that it's about making work visible without creating too much overhead and busy work for us developers. Because again, I fall back on what I said in the very beginning is I like to keep my hands on keyboard and not be in the tool or tracking my work too much.
I think it also relates to last week's discussion on interruptibility. That is, by making the work visible and some interruption comes in, you go put out that fire, and then you can look back at the board and say, oh, no, what were we doing?
Yep, there's that too. Yeah. Yeah, and that's, that's a wonderful topic about this too, is one of the things, and I'm working in a mob or an ensemble, and we're doing Pomodoro timers, and we've played with the timing. We're doing 35 minutes of work, 8 minutes of break. And what we're doing right before we go on break is we sometimes put a quick note on the board as to where we are. Or when we come back, we look at our notes and say, is everything correct in the discovery tree right now? Do we need to update anything? Obviously, we've got a bigger break when we go to lunch, and we pause and we say, okay, let's look at the discovery tree. Are we still on track? Do we need to add anything, remove anything? And then finally, at the end of the day, when we do our ensemble retrospective, we're looking at, okay, what went well today? Turn up the good. And then what other notes? Do we need to leave any breadcrumbs for us to pick up tomorrow morning? And one team that I was on that was doing that was doing ensemble as well. We had people that would come in the morning. I was one of those people that would come in at 6 a.m, and we would start pairing, and then we would do an ensemble. Ensemble would come full throttle at 10 o'clock. By 3, 4 o'clock, I was going home, but the ensemble continued working until 6 at night. And so they would leave notes and finish tickets, finish post-its on the board. And I would, when I came in the morning, I would take a look and say, oh, this is where they are. And we would take off from there.
Awesome. So we are nearing the close of our space in 5 minutes. So if anybody wants to contribute, any questions, any comments, this is the time to do it. Pizarro, I saw your hand was up a few minutes ago. Would you like to add anything?
No, it was actually John, other John, I like to call him. Other John took mine when he connecting the idea of interruptibility to tracking things.
Steal your idea. Steal your name.
Awesome. Let's try to get some concluding remarks from the speakers on the panel, starting with you, Steve, and then we'll wrap this up.
Yeah. I'll sort of go back to something that I said in the very beginning, is that I've been searching for a way to track my work. I love having the big whiteboard, big visible chart with Post-its on it. And I've been trying to find ways to mimic that in our virtual world. And to me, discovery trails are easily the best way that I've found to plan and visualize work at the implementation level. I love them. They're great. And I'm still improving them, and I'm still looking for other ways. But so far, this is the best way that I found.
Awesome. If people have like questions or thoughts or want to connect with you after this, Steve, how can they get in contact with you?
So they can, I don't check Twitter regularly. They can check in on the Seattle Software Crafters Slack channel. Seattle Software Crafters Meetup is something that I do regularly. Actually, Paige Watson and I host that. You can email me at Industrial Logic, and I believe if you go to the Industrial Logic blog on working with discovery trees, you'll be able to get my email address from there. And other than that, I'm frequently found. If you see me at a conference or an open space, come up and talk to me. I'm happy to talk about it.
Fantastic. And then lastly, but most importantly, what are your weekend plans?
My weekend plans. My partner has left me to go have high tea with 3 of her girlfriends in Victoria. So I am home with the kids and we are running amok. We are going to paint the house, the outside of the house.
Wait, does your partner know? Or is this like a, oh, surprise?
No comment. It's
Well, it
going to
was
be a
so
little bit of a
nice. It was
surprise.
nice. It was nice knowing you. It sounds like everyone has about 6 hours to ask you any questions. No, I'm kidding. No, that sounds awesome. Thank you so much for joining the panel and leading this discussion today. Great blog post, great talk. And thank you everyone who joined the space, asked questions, who shared the tweets. Feel free. We hold this session every Friday from 3 to 4 Eastern time. Thank you for joining. Again, thank you, John. Thank you to Manib for co-hosting and Julius for running back behind the scenes. We will see you all next Friday, same time, same place. Everyone be safe, have fun, don't catch the pox or the vid, and hopefully, we all get to share the same space again.